The dog wouldn't let anyone touch her. That was the first thing the paramedics radioed in from the scene on Highway 17, just outside Sudbury, Ontario, on a Tuesday evening in late November, when the temperature had already dropped to -14 and the road was a sheet of black ice that nobody had gotten around to salting yet. A single vehicle accident. A woman unconscious behind the wheel of a dark green pickup truck that had gone sideways into the guardrail, and a dog, a Belgian Malinois, maybe 60 pounds, standing over her body in the snow with his hackles raised and his teeth showing, and absolutely no intention of letting anyone close enough to help. The paramedic who made first contact was a man named Gary, who had been doing the job for 19 years and had seen most things twice. He had never seen anything like this. The dog wasn't panicking, it wasn't confused or lost or frightened. It was working. That was the only word Gary would use later when he filed his report. The animal had assessed the situation, identified the threat, identified the asset, and posted up like it had done this before. Like someone had trained it to do exactly this. It took 11 minutes to get the dog contained enough to reach the woman. They used a thermal blanket to shield Gary's arm, and even then the Malinois only backed off 2 steps, enough to allow access, not enough to signal surrender. Her name was Norah Callister. She was 29 years old. Nobody in the emergency department at Health Sciences North knew what to do with the dog at first. The intake nurse, a steady-handed woman named Frances who had worked the overnight shift for the better part of a decade, made the call to let the dog into the trauma bay rather than restrain it outside. Her reasoning was simple and sound. The animal was calmer inside than it had been out, and a calm dog was easier to manage than a panicking one. She'd seen enough panicking ones to know. Norah Callister had been brought in with a grade 2 concussion, a fractured left clavicle, and a core temperature that the attending physician, Dr. Emmett Chow, described as aggressively low in a tone that made it clear he meant something worse than that. She was coherent enough to give her name and her blood type, and then she passed out again, which was not entirely unexpected given the circumstances. What was unexpected was what she said in the 4 seconds before she lost consciousness. She looked at the dog that was still standing at the foot of the gurney, still watching the room, still making its silent calculations about who was a threat and who was not. And she said, quietly and with tremendous effort, "Don't let them take him." Dr. Chow heard it. Frances heard it. The medical student standing near the door, a quiet young woman named Priya Nair, who had only started her emergency rotation 3 weeks earlier, heard it too. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Dr. Chow looked at the dog, and the dog looked at Dr. Chow, and Dr. Chow said, with a kind of resignation that comes from years of making decisions in underfunded rooms, "Fine, he stays." The dog's name was Fenwick. That was on the tag on his collar, along with a phone number that connected to a voicemail that had been full for some time, and a second number that, when Frances called it, rang 6 times and then went to a message from a man with a deliberate, unhurried voice who said only, "You've reached the line for K9 Operations Registry. If this is an emergency involving a retired service animal, leave the animal's tag number and your callback information." Frances left both. She didn't expect much. It was 11:30 at night, and it was November in Sudbury, and things were the way they were. But she went back into the trauma bay and looked at the dog, Fenwick, and she thought, this is not a pet. She had grown up with dogs. She knew the difference between an animal that lived in a house and an animal that had been forged by something harder than that. The way Fenwick held himself, the way he tracked every person who came through the door, the controlled stillness of him even now. That wasn't obedience training. That was years of something she didn't have a word for. She pulled up a chair and sat near the gurney, close enough that Fenwick could smell her, and she waited. Norah Callister's emergency contact was her older brother, a man named Dale who drove up from Espanola in under 40 minutes, which suggested he had not obeyed a single posted speed limit on Route 144. He was broad-shouldered and red-eyed, and he stood at the door to the trauma bay and looked at his sister, and then looked at the dog, and then looked at Francis, with an expression that was trying very hard to be composed and not entirely succeeding. "Fenwick," he said. It wasn't a greeting, it was something else. A name said the way you say something when you're relieved it's still there. Fenwick's ears moved. He didn't break his guard position, but something in his body shifted, the way a soldier at attention will acknowledge an officer without actually moving. Dale Callister lowered himself into the chair across from Francis and put his hands on his knees and said, "How bad is it?" "She's stable," Francis said. "The cold was the main concern. They've got her warming now. The clavicle is clean and the concussion is moderate. She's going to be sore and tired and she'll need someone with her for a few days, but she's going to be fine." Dale nodded slowly. He was looking at Fenwick again. "How long has she had him?" Francis asked. Dale was quiet for a moment. "She didn't used to," he said, "have him. He belonged to someone else first." He didn't say anything more than that, and Francis had learned, over many years in this line of work, when not to push. The someone else had been a Canadian Forces military police officer named Sergeant Cole Hadley, and he had been partnered with Fenwick for 4 years before an IED on a road outside Kandahar ended that partnership abruptly and irrevocably. Norah Callister had been Cole Hadley's partner in a different sense of the word. They had met in Petawawa, in the summer that was the last good summer before everything changed, at a barbecue held in someone's backyard where the smoke went straight up into a still sky, and someone's kid had fallen into the kiddie pool and everyone had laughed. She had been there with a friend. He had been there with Fenwick, because Cole Hadley brought Fenwick everywhere that Fenwick was allowed to go, and several places where he wasn't. She had crouched down to greet the dog first. That was the thing Cole always told people afterward, with something that wasn't quite pride, but was close to it. She said hello to him before she said hello to me. He thought that meant something. He was right that it meant something, though it took him 2 more months to figure out exactly what. They had 3 years together before his second deployment. Not long in the arithmetic of a life. Long enough that she had learned the shape of how he slept and the specific sound of his laugh and the way Fenwick would nudge her ankle with his nose at 5:30 every morning. Because 5:30 was when Cole got up, and Fenwick did not understand why the same rule didn't apply to everyone. He didn't come home from the second deployment. Fenwick did. There is a protocol for what happens to a military working dog when its handler is killed in the field. It is a careful protocol, written by people who understood both the value of the animal and the complexity of what the animal carries with it after. Fenwick went through debriefing, there is no other word for it, and then through a period of evaluation, and then through the formal process of retirement, and then a woman in Ottawa sent Norah Callister a letter asking whether she would be willing to take him. Norah had read the letter 3 times standing in her kitchen, in the house she had bought with the intention of it being their house. Then she had folded it and put it in the drawer under the phone and gone to bed and not slept. In the morning, she called the number on the letterhead. "I don't know anything about training a working dog," she said to the woman on the phone. "He doesn't need training," the woman said. "He's retired. He just needs a home. Will he?" She stopped. Started again. "Will he be okay with me? Without—" "We don't know," the woman said with honesty that Norah appreciated even though it cost her something. "But we think so. He knew you. Cole made sure of that. That last part. Cole made sure of that." She thought about that for a long time afterward. She thought about Cole deciding at some point, deliberately, to bring her into Fenwick's world. To make sure the dog knew her voice and her smell and her particular way of moving through a room. To give Fenwick someone, just in case. She went to Ottawa on a Thursday and came home on a Friday with Fenwick in the back seat. That was 3 years ago. In the trauma bay at Health Sciences North, the night wore on. Dr. Chow checked in twice. Francis stayed. Dale Callister made phone calls in a low voice out in the hallway and came back looking marginally less stricken. Fenwick held his position at the foot of the gurney with the patience of something built for long operations. Though Francis noticed that every time a machine beeped or a door swung open, his eyes moved immediately to Norah's face, checking, and then returned to the room. Priya Nair, the medical student, had not gone home. She told herself it was because she wanted to observe the management of a cold exposure case and a moderate TBI in the same patient, which was true enough as far as it went. But the truth that went further was that she couldn't stop thinking about the dog. She had grown up in Mississauga, in a house with no animals and a mother who had explained carefully and repeatedly that animals was a burden. She didn't know anything about military working dogs. She had looked Fenwick up on her phone in the break room, reading through dry institutional language about Belgian Malinois temperament and multi-agency deployment records and handler bonding protocols, and she had come back into the bay, feeling like she had been briefly permitted to see through a window into a world she had never known existed. She asked Dale Callister quietly, while Francis was speaking to someone from the neurology department on the phone. "Does he know that the person he was with, that Sergeant Hadley, is gone?" Dale looked at her for a long moment. He was the kind of man who thought before he answered things. "I think he knows Cole isn't coming back," Dale said. "Whether a dog understands what that means the way we do, I don't know. But he adjusted. He watches out for Norah now the same way he used to watch out for Cole, like he decided she was the mission." Priya looked at Fenwick. Fenwick did not look back at her. He was watching the door. Norah Callister woke up at 3 in the morning. It wasn't a gradual waking, the kind where the room assembles itself slowly around the edges. It was abrupt, one moment unconscious, the next completely alert, eyes open, scanning. She had been like that since Fenwick came to live with her. She'd noticed it happening gradually over the first few months, her sleep patterns changing, her startle response sharpening. She'd read about it once, in an article about people who work with high-drive dogs over long periods. Something about proximity to a vigilant animal, recalibrating the nervous system of the person near them. She didn't know if she believed it completely, but she noticed it. The first thing she saw was Fenwick. He was still at the foot of the gurney, but his posture had shifted. Still alert, still present, but no longer standing. He had settled into a watchful crouch, and when her eyes found him in the low light of the room, his tail moved once, a single controlled sweep, and then was still. She exhaled. "Hey, buddy," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected. Her throat was dry, and her clavicle was making its opinions known in no uncertain terms, and her head felt like something was installed in it that shouldn't be. But she was alive. She knew that with the particular clarity of someone who had spent 3 years learning how to sit with uncertainty. Francis was still in the chair. She had fallen asleep somewhere around 2, chin tipped toward her chest, her hands folded in her lap with the neatness of someone who folded even their sleep. Dale had gone out to find something to eat and had not, as far as Norah could see, come back yet. Norah lay still for a while, cataloguing the sounds of the department around her, the specific kind of quiet that only exists in hospitals in the deep middle of the night, the rhythm of the machines, the fact that Fenwick was here and whole and apparently had not terrorized anyone badly enough to be removed, which, knowing Fenwick, felt like a significant achievement. She tried to piece together the accident. She remembered the road. She remembered the radio cutting out. She remembered the ice appearing under the wheels with absolutely no warning. A sudden change in the physics of the truck, a textbook loss of control that she had no time to correct. She remembered the guardrail rail coming up. She did not remember anything after that. She looked at Fenwick and thought about the fact that someone had gotten to her. Someone had helped her, and Fenwick had let them. She didn't know why that made her eyes sting. Maybe it was the concussion. Maybe it was something else. At 7 in the morning, a woman arrived at the emergency department asking about a patient named Norah Callister and a dog registered under the K9 operations number that Francis had called the night before. Her name was Major Ingrid Castellano, retired, and she was 61 years old, and she drove a sensible Subaru and wore her grey hair in a clip that had seen better days, and she carried herself with the particular uprightness of someone who had spent decades being the person in the room that other people oriented themselves toward. She was currently the regional coordinator for a program that placed retired military working dogs with families of fallen service members, and she had driven 4 hours from Barry to be here. She did not announce any of this to the intake desk. She simply asked which room, and something about the way she asked it made the intake volunteer give her the bay number without asking her to prove she was family. Norah was sitting up when Major Castellano came in. The clavicle was immobilized. Her hair was a catastrophe, and she had the look of someone who had recently updated their understanding of their own mortality, but her eyes were clear. Fenwick was on the floor beside her gurney now. He had been allowed up at some point during the small hours, and then encouraged back down when Dr. Chow came in at 6 and raised an eyebrow at the German shepherd on the hospital bed. When Major Castellano came through the door, Fenwick raised his head. He didn't stand. He didn't change his position, but his ears came up, and something in his expression shifted, the specific quality of recognition that a dog reserves for someone they have encountered many times under many different conditions. Major Castellano stopped in the doorway. She looked at the dog for a long moment. Then she said one word. She said it quietly, in the particular cadence of a command. Not harsh, not loud, but precise in the way that commands need to be to mean what they mean, she said, steady. Fenwick put his head back down on his paws. Norah stared. He was Cole's dog, Major Castellano said, coming the rest of the way into the room, pulling the second chair around and sitting in it with the directness of someone who did not waste time on preamble. Before yours. I ran the program that sent him to you. I know, Norah said. I remember your name from the letters. I got the call about the accident from the nurse last night. I wanted to make sure he was all right. A pause. And you, he's all right, Norah said. He did everything right. I don't actually know the details of what happened after the guardrail, but, she looked at Fenwick, I'm assuming he's the reason anyone found me. The paramedic's report says he was standing over you when they arrived, on a highway, in the dark, in -14 weather. Major Castellano's voice was even. They had significant difficulty getting to you. That sounds like him. There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. Outside the bay, the morning shift was starting, and the department was waking up with the gradual bustle of a new rotation beginning. Can I ask you something? Norah said. Yes, that word. Steady. Was that one of Cole's commands? Major Castellano looked at her carefully. No, she said after a moment. That one's mine. I trained Fenwick before Cole did. He was with me for 8 months as a pup, before he went to Cole's unit. She paused. He remembers everything, this dog. That's both the gift and the burden of them. Norah looked at Fenwick. Fenwick's tail moved once. Cole used to say that, Norah said quietly, that Fenwick would outlast everyone's memory of him, that the dog would remember things nobody else would. She said it without breaking, which was something. 3 years ago, she couldn't have said Cole's name in a room with a stranger, without her voice going somewhere she couldn't control. She still felt it, the particular weight of a loss that didn't resolve, that just became something you built around. But she could say his name now. She could say it and remain herself. Major Castellano said nothing. She understood about things that didn't resolve. Dale came back at 8 with coffee for everyone, including, in a gesture that Priya Nair would later think about for a long time, a paper cup of water that he set down on the floor near Fenwick without making a production of it. Fenwick drank it. Dr. Chow discharged Norah at noon with instructions that filled 2 pages and a referral to a concussion clinic, and a stern conversation about driving on uncleared roads in November that Norah accepted with the demeanor of someone who had received stern conversations before and survived them. The paperwork took 45 minutes. Fenwick spent those 45 minutes sitting beside the discharge desk with his eyes on the door, tracking everyone who came and went. Frances, who was ending a 12-hour shift and should have left an hour earlier, had stayed to say goodbye. She didn't quite know why. She would not have described herself as a sentimental person, but she crouched down next to Fenwick before she went and looked at him for a moment. "Good dog," she said. It was a simple thing to say, and she meant it simply, and Fenwick regarded her with his pale, amber eyes, and she thought, not for the first time that night, that she was in the presence of something that had been asked to carry more than its share and had carried it without complaint. She went home and slept for 9 hours. In the Subaru in the parking lot before Dale pulled out onto Paris Street and pointed them south toward Espanola and the house that had become home in the way that places become home. When you have no intention of leaving them again, Norah turned around in the passenger seat to look at Fenwick in the back. He was sitting upright, watching the road ahead. He always rode like that. He had never in 3 years been the kind of dog that fell asleep in the car. Too much to watch, too much that might need watching. She thought about Major Castellano, who had driven 4 hours in the early morning dark to make sure a dog was all right. She thought about Frances, who had pulled up a chair and stayed. She thought about Dale, who had broken every traffic law between Espanola and Sudbury to get to her, and who had set a cup of water on the floor without saying anything about it. She thought about Cole. She thought about the fact that he had done something deliberate and considered and careful before his second deployment to make sure that Fenwick knew her, that Fenwick had someone, and she thought about how that meant, in whatever way a person can arrange things from across the distance of not knowing whether they'll come back, he had made sure she had someone too. That was the kind of person he had been, the kind that thought about what the people they loved would need after. She felt Fenwick's nose press briefly against the back of her hand, which was resting on the top of the seat. She turned back around and looked out through the windshield at the grey November sky. Dale drove. Fenwick watched the road, and somewhere behind them, the city of Sudbury went on being itself. Hospitals and highways and black ice, and people doing the best they could in the middle of the night when everything went sideways, and Norah Callister went home.